Good evening, and a very warm welcome to you and all the people who would be listening us soon in this today's special Ask Me Anything session. I'm Swarandhiman, Executive Director at Asian Exporter Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I feel delighted to host today's special Ask Me Anything session. This is titled EU Trade Legal Structure, Compliances and Risk. As Indians businesses, they generally look towards Europe for growth. So it becomes very important to understand the legal framework, compliance requirement, and the risk mitigation strategies. So to guide us through all this, we are delighted to have with us today Mr. Daniel Dews Reyes, who is a partner at Reyes and Palicano International Lawyers in Portugal. Uh, with his extensive experience in cross border legal advisory, he has worked closely with international business navigating EU markets. So, while welcoming Mr. Daniel, I would briefly introduce you all to the organization AECCI also. So AECCI, that is basically a prominent chamber based in Mumbai, India, and we are proudly recognized by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. AECCI has been actively supporting Indian businesses in their global trade journey through strategic partnerships or the knowledge sharing, trade facilitation, etc. As part of this mission, we have already signed the cooperation agreements with 50 trade and law experts across the globe. So our idea behind this is to provide the on ground support to all our trade members and the kind of support, guidance, knowledge they want from our exports. So this is completely kind of hand holding that they can take from our experts. So let us now come back to the AME session, today's session. And once again, I would like to welcome Mr. Daniel. Thank you, sir, for sparing the time for being with us here today.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And to start with the very first question, you can say the fundamental. So, how do you typically advise Indian businesses to choose between distributorship agents or setting up their own local entity while starting business with Europe?
I do really like this question because I think it's really important. And it depends a bit on the profile of the investor and what is his long-term goals. So I would say if it's a short-term goal, or if the entrepreneur wants to test the EU market, start with the distributor, because with the distributor, this is a safe entry point. It's fairly easy to enter the EU market, and that allows one essential thing: it's to reduce the regulatory exposure and the risks for the person that is doing some exporting. So in my view, it's a really good way to test the market, test the product, and see if it has traction in the EU market. If it does, then my advice is to consider a local entity. From experience in the market and assisting entrepreneurs in Portugal, I would say that agents are not that used here. It's not something that it is that common, and a majority of people will jump this step. So they'll either have a Portuguese EU distributor, or they'll have their own entity here, but they will skip the agent's step because it's usually not into their favor. Some companies, once they are established in Portugal, they'll get local agents to sell their products. That is something common, but foreign companies to have just an agent here, that's not that common. And usually, what I perceive is that entrepreneurs do skip this step. In terms of setting up a local entity, it can be done in two ways. Either the Indian company can obtain a Portuguese tax number here, or the person that is behind the company in India can obtain the tax number here and hold the company in his own personal name. So the first choice that the entrepreneur needs to do is, will the company in Portugal be held by the Indian company, or will it be held by the physical person behind the Indian company? And one other key aspect that will need to be pointed out is that a manager out of the Portuguese company needs to be nominated here, and the manager is the one that legally binds the company. So having a partner does not legally bind the company. It's the manager, and the partner and the manager can be two different people. That's not a problem, but the manager needs to be one physical person behind the company, and that is the person that will sign all the contracts. So sometimes the entrepreneur will nominate someone in Portugal to be the manager, although it's a role of a lot of responsibility because let's say that some taxation is not paid. Let's say that some social security debts are within the company. Then the manager is liable to pay those debts, even if the company goes under, even if the company goes bankrupt. So the partner has its responsibility limited. He puts the money in the company, he invests in the company, and if the company goes bankrupt, then that's not a problem. He just loses the money in the time, of course, in the investment that it was done in the company. The manager, though, in Portugal has this added responsibility that if there's any taxation that was not paid by the company, and even if the company goes under, the manager will be liable to pay that taxation out of his own pocket. And this is why it's a really high risk situation to be a manager. And sometimes what happens is that the manager is the company partner because the two roles do align. One other key aspect in terms of having a company in Portugal is that an accountant needs to be nominated. So it's mandatory by law once a company is incorporated in Portugal to have an accountant. And it's mandatory as well to pay social security for the manager. And the expenses of having a company open in Portugal, even if the company is not invoicing anything, they are around 5,000 euros per year. This is between the expenses out of the accountant and between the social security expenses. It's around the figure of 5,000 euros. So it's a long-term commitment. And if the goal is just to test the market, again, go the distributor route because it's way better. If the intention is the long game, the long term, then definitely having a local company is highly beneficial, but it comes with these costs and with these nuances in terms of nominating the manager and the manager being responsible for this job. So what I see is sometimes having a phased approach. The client will start with a local distributor, and then if things are going in the right direction, then they'll incorporate the company and they'll do the distribution themselves because they can get a higher cut out of the business. So this is what it makes sense to me. And the agents, as initially discussed, we don't see a lot of added value in that route.
Okay, fine. So you mean to say, firstly, they have the option to go through a distributor, and if things goes okay, then they can offer either their own having their sales representative or having their own sales office there, right?
Correct, correct. This is my recommendation. And once the company is incorporated in Portugal, you can hire local workers to do what's needed. And there's a nuance here that needs to be discussed. There's three different types of contracts that can be done to hire someone. The initial is the service providers, someone that is not bound to the company, that does some specific goal or target that you need, that's just for the service. Like, for instance, lawyers or accountants, they are service providers. Then you have a term contract, and that term contract is for 6 months, for instance. You just hire that person for a short period of time because you had an increase in activity, or once the company is being incorporated, or a no-term contract. And once this no-term contract is signed, or once the term contract evolves to a no-term contract, then to fire someone in Portugal, it's time-consuming and it takes some investment, and it's not as easy. So this is something that needs to be accounted as well, is once you hire local workers, you need to be sure that that person is really needed, that's had a benefit for the company, because the proceedings to terminate a work contract in Portugal are cumbersome, they take time, and they need a justification. That person needs a justification to be demoted. Of course, the company and the worker can always reach an agreement and terminate the job position, but to do it without the agreement of the worker, it takes time, money, and it's a cumbersome procedure. So it's the HR is really important, and this is my point. Sometimes it's worthwhile to hire an HR company just so you select the right person, because a bad hiring someone that it doesn't work out can be costly for a company.
Yes, right. So this is indeed very insightful because generally, while entering any market, people get confused with this particular strategy of entering the market. So this is very important to understand. Thank you for sharing your view on that, sir. And let us move to the next question. What are the most frequent or the compliance or documentation mistakes that generally businesses make when entering new markets? And of course, that later creates trouble for them. So, what are the common mistakes?
I would say it's the mentality of do first and then think about the consequences later. Some people are really eager to start and
Yes.
just to develop, and they don't surround themselves by the correct people. And they should surround themselves with a good accountancy team. So the accountant, especially in the first years, is really important because, well, accountancy rules are different from country to country, and having a good accountant does make a difference in terms of the initial steps out of the entrepreneur in Portugal. The other one is a proper legal team as well, to do a well-developed work contract, to have the contracts with other businesses developed in a sense that they do protect the investor. All of that needs to be done even prior to the incorporation of the company. So first, my advice is surround yourself with good technical people, because that does make a difference within the success of a project or not. Then the other common mistakes that I do see is problems with conformity of the products that are sold in Portugal. So let's say that the EU does have quite a lot of norms, especially within electrical products or food products. And the products that are sold in Portugal or in Europe will need to be CE compliant. And this is something that the entrepreneur needs to investigate. And then again, the importance of having a good legal team to see if the products are indeed CE compliant. Then the other problem is connected with customs. So whenever a batch of products is coming to Portugal and there's a container in port, if there's something wrong with the container, this can be costly in two ways. One way is either you're paying too much tax in tariffs, let's say if the coding out of the products are incorrect, so the tariffs can be misapplied, and you can be paying more money if the coding, the what's called the AS codes in terms of the customs, and if there's a misclassification, then this can be costly. And the other one is a container stuck in port has fees that the port charges. So sometimes this may occur that there's a problem with the classification of the products, and this needs to be sorted out with documents that need to be obtained abroad. And then the entrepreneur is paying X per day just to have the container in port, and this is highly costly. So this is what we usually see in the market, is problems with customs in having what we call an agent to unload the property out of the containers, the goods that are being shipped to Europe, is really important, because if an agent knows what he is doing and he knows the inner workings out of the tax, the customs in Portugal, this assists highly in doing a friction-free process and to pay the correct tariffs that are corresponding to the products that are being imported. And the other one is problems with VAT. VAT in Europe is a reality. There's different rates between different countries. Each country has a different VAT rule, but the rules are fairly the same in Europe because the legal frame is fairly the same. It's just the rates that each country does apply, and sometimes this create problems for the entrepreneur. So these are the main things that I would like to point out for the entrepreneurs to be aware of. Is indeed having a good agent to unload the property out of the containers, to code the products well, and to be CE compliant, and again to be mindful of VAT obligations. If you the recap, I think it's this one.
Okay, fine. Means you should have the awareness about the local rules and
Correct.
of course certification, C certification and all. Of course, and knowing about the custom rules is very important
Sure.
whenever we are doing business
Before
with any
sending
country.
anything, because having a container in port stuck and then trying
Hmm.
to sort out the documentation is really costly because
Very
it
costly.
costs shipping space or port space
Detention
is really
charges, right?
high demand. So the ports charge whatever they want, and that can be costly per day for sure.
Exactly. So this is very crucial point, and people should be aware of all these points in advance. So awareness is very important. And taking this particular point to the step further, I would like to talk about the regulatory compliances also, for specifically for Indian businesses entering Europe. Where do you see the biggest misunderstanding around the regulatory system? This I would like to know.
It's a really interesting question because there's a perception and I think a misconception that the EU is just has one rule. We don't. We have rules that come from the EU Parliament that then guide the rules of each individual country. So, if you
Okay.
want to sell a specific product, in my advice is areas like food, cosmetics, and electronics. Those are the areas that need to be more acute in terms of the each specific country's regulation, because otherwise you may be compliant with the regulations in Portugal and Spain, for instance, but there's some little nuance in France that needs to be compliant. So if you want to sell products all over Europe, you should be mindful of each individual country's rules because they may be nuanced. And although the market is one single market, each individual country can apply their own rules. So there's different tax procedures, different bureaucracy, and different levels of enforcement. Some countries take really serious some situations, and some of the countries are a bit more lax in terms of the enforcement of the rules. So this is something to be mindful of. And in Europe, there's a really strong protection out of the consumer. So in terms of warranties, this has something that the EU has been pushing in the last years. What has been more talked is, for instance, the USB-C in iPhones, for instance, the push that the EU had, or the plugs for electric cars that we did standardize everything inside Europe. So we do see the effort of the EU Parliament to standardize some issues. But then each individual state can do their own regulations with the EU standard, and sometimes that's a little difference between countries may be the difference between the entrepreneur being allowed to sell a product or not. So before entering a new market, just be aware that some differences may apply and try to perceive if this is a reality. So again, preparation before entry is key to avoid any surprises and eventually any fines in terms of the EU market. So this is my take on this question. It's a single market, sure, but each country has its own nuances that will need to be approached individually.
So this is very important point actually. As you said, of course, by Europe we understand that the rules would be same for all the countries. But as you said, we need to study country wise. Specifically for a country, we should understand the rules and of course the spirit behind the regulations there. That is also very important to understand.
Correct.
And yeah,
It's
thank you, sir.
sometimes clients do ask me, well, I've incorporated a company, and this has happened with Indian clients, but do I need a permit to export or import anything? In thesis, no. for, let's call it normal products, I say cashew nuts, and the person wants to import cashew nuts to Portugal, it doesn't need
Yes.
any specific authorization to import those cashew nuts, but they need to be CE compliant. You see, in terms of the regulations for food importation, they need to be CE compliant. But for instance, in Portugal, there's no special authorizations that will need to be obtained for a company to do importing of some products. So it's free in that sense, for instance.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing the knowledge on this. And now, again, moving to the, I would say, backbone of the trade, and that is contract. So this is very important because whatever disputes comes later on, they all are based on the contract only. So how should the businesses structure contracts with EU buyers or to reduce the risk later on? So just a little guidance over the trade contracts.
I'm the type of lawyer that avoids litigation at all costs. And this is because a well made contract, with the contract well thought of, will avoid, I would say, 95% of the problems. Then we need to deal with the other 5%, but a well made contract does avoid the majority of the problems. And indeed, having a contract that protects both parties and not a contract that is unfair to one of the parties. A good contract protects both parties and has protections in place that protect either the person that is supplying goods to Europe or the person that is receiving the goods. So having legal advice on this step is really key, because otherwise things can go south quite easily. And eventually start small. Start testing the market here in Portugal instead of just initiating with a big contract. Start small, test the market. If things go well, if you do establish good partners, good selling channels here in Portugal or in the EU, then step up the game and do contracts that are a little bit more substantial. But start small initially, test the market, and then see the result. In terms of my recommendation, especially for big contracts, is to try to avoid the normal litigation system, the normal courts, because that does take time, and time is, of course, money. Therefore, if we can do what's called the alternative methods to resolve disputes, and this is usually with a jury of experts that are nominated for one for each one of the parties, and then the two juries nominate a third jury, and then the jury resolve the dispute, is faster, because having a resolution in court after 4 or 5 years, and then the situation is just stuck in court, does not it's not in favor of anyone, either the person that is claiming or even the person that is defending of that claim. Having such a long time in court, it's not favorable to anyone. And eventually, the payment distribution in terms of any contract is very important. So try to avoid payments that are really large in the beginning. Do some installments and ask for guarantees. Ask for letters of credit, ask for letters of comfort from banks, ask for eventually personal guarantees of the companies that you're dealing with, the managers out of the company, if they are liable, because let's say that you're dealing with a small company in Portugal that still doesn't have a lot of traction, but then you say, okay, the company is liable if something goes wrong, but the manager of the company is liable as well. If the company is serious and they are in the market to provide a serious service or a serious channel, they will not mind in having the manager personally liable for any problems that will occur. If the company is not that serious, they may decline this responsibility. So there's ways to implement in the contracts that do distribute the risk. The risk distribution is really important. And the arbitration clauses, as I was mentioning before, and the jury selection methods are really important to try to have a speedy resolution to any dispute. although the jury may reach a decision that is not up to the liking of anyone, but at least it's a fast decision. And sometimes a not so perfect decision, but faster one is better than the perfect decision after 5 or 6 years. You see, and this is my take on this situation. A good contract avoids a lot of problems, avoids the normal jurisdiction, and eventually consider the risk distribution and payment details. So the entrepreneur is not paying a lot of money up front, and it's paying as the contract progresses.
Right. And just to summarize, you mean to say, and of course, people should understand this. This is very important to draft a good contract. Putting all the, of course, payment options, as you said, letter of credit is the most preferred kind of payment option for the beginners at least. And then putting the right clauses. I would say the safety clause in the trade contract, that is also equally important. Let me tell you in between that we at AECCIE have established our own international arbitration center, and we keep insisting to all our members to put the safety clause in their model clause
Sure.
in their trade contracts, just to avoid any risk later on. So this, thank you, sir.
It
Thank you
makes total
for
sense.
sharing the knowledge.
Makes total sense.
Yeah. And now, for MSME, for the small businesses, sir, what would you suggest? What are the, you can say, top three legal or compliance safeguards that they should consider when starting a business with Europe or Portugal, sir?
So I would say due diligence. To have a due diligence of your partners, of your clients. If it's something major, it needs to be done. Let's say that a shopping mall or a grocery shop wants to buy 2 tons of X product. Having the due diligence on that potential client is important. What we usually do is we search for information that is publicly available. We'll go into the court system to see if there's any pending legal actions against those people. We'll ascertain if they're owing money to the Portuguese state or the Portuguese Social Security, and we try to do the due diligence as best as possible, just to see if it's a trustworthy partner or client. Especially in big contracts, this does make a world out of a difference, because we've detected situations in due diligence before that we just recommended our clients step away from this. This can be harmful, and find another route, because the people that you're dealing with are not as trustworthy as they should. And it's just a question of rerouting to another option. There's always more clients, there's always more partners. And this is the beauty out of a free market. There's always more options available. And if one option is not up to standard, then just deviate to some other route. Then it's the thing that we mentioned before. It's the regulatory compliance check. This is something really important, because otherwise, if the products are already here but they're not compliant, then they can't be sold. So these checks should be done before. And again, a topic that we didn't mention already: the contracts being well made, and avoiding any problems, and eventually having this personal liability to the managers that I did mention in some nuanced cases. One thing that I didn't mention, that it's connected with the legal compliance and safeguards, is banking. The banking industry in Portugal is not as advanced in other places. It does have security measures. I'm not talking about in terms of security. In terms of security, it does implement the security measures like we see in other countries, but it's more in terms of being creative and supporting businesses. And especially for a newly created business, it's going to be difficult to find support in the Portuguese banking system, because they want to see some traction in the market. They usually want to see 3-4 years of evolution of the company in the Portuguese market, and then when they see that that business idea does work out, then they will be keen on supporting the company. So in terms of the foreign investors, sometimes my advice is try to obtain support in your home country in terms of the banking system initially, to support the Portuguese project. And then once the Portuguese project flourishes, you can count on the Portuguese banking system. But in the beginning, once the company is incorporated, do expect that the banks will frown upon that project because it didn't pass the stress of time yet. And this is one of the hurdles that the entrepreneurs will find here in Portugal is the lack of instruments and even some resistance in newly incorporated companies to support them financially.
Okay, so this is very important point about the banking system that you have spoken. So I would see my people, my trade community. I would like to convey this point to all of them. This is very important indeed, and also, sir, as in India, this is just out of the way I am asking. In India, we have ECGC, means people generally take their help to cover the risks and all, so there would be some institutions to cover the financing and all, right? So can you brief about that also?
Also, sorry, the connection broke. Can you please repeat?
Yeah, I was telling, I was asking about the institution that would be providing, apart from the banking, you can say the financing support, the institution that can provide any established or a known institution there.
We do have some loan institutions that are for startups, for instance, that they are more targeted for startups, and we have EU financing as well.
EU finance.
There's tranches of money that comes from the EU that are targeted for companies or either startups or already companies operating in the market. And this is an interesting area that, let's say that an entrepreneur wants to develop a project, he delivers the project. If the project is approved, he will get financing from the EU, either financing without any interest to pay, or with a really low interest, and this may be a route to explore. There's actually companies that do the monitoring and delivery of these projects. They take their commission, but at least the entrepreneur knows that the project is delivered according to the rules and regulations, in that it does stand a chance, because these procedures of obtaining money from the EU are highly bureaucratic. And if the project is well made and well delivered, the chances of obtaining the approval are indeed higher for sure. But this is something that needs to be developed by people that already know the system, so it doesn't increase the chances of obtaining an approval. So EU financing may be quite interesting to explore, especially for big dimension projects, because it's something that allows some projects to flourish, and it avoids the normal banking hurdles and difficulties that I was mentioning before.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. This was indeed very important takeaway. And my last question, because we have almost covered that, then too I would be repeating my question. I wanted to ask about the legal tools that Indian exporters should consider to secure the payments. But this particular point we have already covered in the payment options and all. So now, Mr. Daniel, I would like to ask how Waze and Palicano can be helpful for the Indian businesses. Like what type of services you can provide them, for what type of issues they can come to you.
So we assist companies from A to Z, from the beginning to the end. Usually, clients will approach us, will send us an email. This is my project. This is what I wanted to do, and we will be able to first obtain the Portuguese tax numbers. We call it the NIF here, for the manager of the company, for the partners of the company, and for the foreign company. Let's say an Indian company wants to own the Portuguese company. That's totally fine, and this is the initial procedure. Then we will be able to incorporate the company at a distance via a power of attorney. So the power of attorney will be signed in India. Then we'll open the company here on behalf of the clients. And then we will assist with the bank account opening, because it's necessary for a company to own a bank account in Portugal. And we will assist as well in hiring people in terms of the contracts. work contracts as well as contracts from B to B, B to C, all those types of contracts we will be able to assist clients with. We can provide legal advisory on Portugal, on the Portuguese, to be Portuguese compliant. On other countries, this needs to be done with local teams because, again, local markets have specific rules and we are only authorized to operate in Portugal. If the company needs to have partners, if the company needs to remove partners, we do all of that. And let's say that the entrepreneur has already developed the project, let's say 10 years, and the project has come to an end. We do the closing out of the company, we terminate the company as well. So from A to Z, we provide full legal support of anyone and everyone that wants to invest in Portugal and in Europe in terms of their entrepreneurship projects.
Okay, fine. So it is kind of a complete holding you can provide them. And
Correct.
yeah. So I would like to tell all the viewers that we at AECCI have created e-platform. There you can go, you can just sign in and can select your expert collaborator. Like you want to take the advice from Mr. Daniel, you can simply select their recent Palicono, and you can request for an appointment. A meeting will be fixed with Mr. Daniel, and there you can ask all about your whatever requirements are. And of course, you can take their tariff, you can take their list of services, and later on, you can have a direct exchange with Mr. Daniel. So, this is how we work at AECCI. I would insist each and every one of my viewers to please log in, see what all collaborators are available there. Instead of going blindly to any country for the trading purpose, it is always advisable to go with the help of some expert. So we keep inviting such experts from different countries so that you can have trust and you can simply book your appointments with them. You can have a meeting, you can win their trust, you can keep your requirements, and you can take their services. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Thank you for being with us
My
today,
pleasure.
sharing your valuable insights. And I am sure people who would be watching this later on, they have would be having the clarity on many legal and compliance related aspects of trading with European Union. Once again, I would also like to thank the viewers who would be watching this video, and again would insist them to visit the website and log in to see the experts there. Thank you, sir. Anything that you want to add
Thank you.
on
Thank you.
this?
No, I think the as I said before, preparation is key, and surround yourself with the right people. Those are probably my main two key aspects that I would like people to retain from this call.
Thank you so much. And again, we'll meet soon for some other program.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You too. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.